Hey guys, welcome back to the pod. Today I'm joined by a very special builder in DeFi, and I would say a dear friend of mine now as well over the last couple of years, Simon, founder and CEO of Reya. Hey Simon, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are here at ETHCC in Cannes, and yeah, Simon and I we're knowing each other for quite some time, and yeah, today we want to talk about yourself and of course Reya, because I think Reya is one of the most exciting projects in DeFi right now in a very sort of hot category, going into perp dexes and beyond. But before we maybe jump into Reya, let's talk about yourself. Who are you? How did you get into crypto? And of course, yeah, how did you sort of end up founding Reya?
Yeah. So this is, I mean, it's kind of crazy. This is my fourth startup now, which makes me feel old.
Wow.
I know how old some certain people are, so makes me feel just as old. um, but yeah, no. So the first two were just traditional fintech. I basically came out of university, went to McKinsey, hated it, so left and started a business. And that first one didn't work. We just learned a ton. Second one was a lot more successful. Is AI fintech. We sold that to one of the big banks, and the sale coincided perfectly with DeFi summer. So crypto had always been something I'd been interested in. This company kind of like I was able to wash my hands at the perfect time and jump basically all into DeFi. And I then started a project called Vaults Protocol, which for some OGs listening, they may be familiar with. It was the world's first interest rate swap DEX. We actually grew that to the third biggest DEX in 2022. So it was DYDX, Uniswap, and Vaults, right? Which was obviously different instruments, but it gives you an idea of like the adoption. And
And it's now kind of coming back, right? Something
Vaults,
similar. And I think like I heard some DeFi protocols are like bringing back the concept. I think it's probably is a typical case of a great idea, just like too early.
it was too early.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we stopped it. It's just too early. Is We kind of grew it as far as I think we could grow it, but actually to really scale it, you need you needed more rates, right? Like, and we've now got that with all the different yield bearing stable coins, and we've got RWAs coming on chain, right? So you needed more rate markets to exist, but you also needed a different like spectrum of participants who are actually going to trade rates. Like Pendle ended up getting product market fit about 6 months after we sunset Volts because points started, right? And it's points that actually have driven like the product market fit for Pendle, not like actually people trading rates. And but yeah, it is making a comeback. There's people that reach out quite a lot actually who might be doing a version of Vaults and they're asking for advice. And to be honest, because we're not doing it, we're actually just happy to support them. But yeah, when we sunset that, then the reason we sunset that is it's just too early. And in the back of my mind, I had been thinking about this idea for Reya for a while, and I kind of like shared it with the rest of the team. And actually, the entire team then came across from Vaults to Reya, right? And all of our investors actually had choices kind of staying or coming with us. Everybody came across. So it's probably about 18 months ago now that we properly started full time on Rare, where the objective of Rare, like long term, is essentially decentralized NASDAQ, right? And what is it, or internet capital markets, however you want to describe it, like, and kind of what does that mean? It's about essentially creating the execution layer for global capital markets. And how do you enable that? Well, you need something that is fast, so it's performant as traditional finance, if you actually want to displace it, but also decentralized. And fundamentally, they are, from an engineering perspective, two like conflicting requirements. And what we've been on over the past 18 months is essentially a journey just to figure out how to solve that.
Yeah. And for me, this is sort of like the holy grail of DeFi, if
Yeah.
you put it that way, right? I think this is one of still the big sort of visions that I think projects in the space want to realize is like how can you actually recreate these traditional financial markets completely on a decentralized platform, and not have the not go into the same issues that we see on like Nasdaq's with co-location and so forth. So yeah, super excited to dive deeper into, of course, how it works or how you guys want to build it. So yeah, maybe let's start talking about how does it work? Like, how do you like what sort of unique architecture did you sort of bring forward with Reya that you think will be the winning one?
Can I just go back actually to how big it can become? Because I think it's
Let's do
something
it.
that's just easily kind of skipped over. So there's a couple of points here which I think help frame it for people. So Bitcoin, what's Bitcoin actually trying to do? But Bitcoin is essentially trying to decentralize the monetary base of the financial system, right? How big is that? It's around a $5 to $10 trillion idea in terms of the size of the monetary base of the financial system today. Capital markets, just global capital markets today, is a $270 trillion like size, right? If you aggregate all of the activity that takes place, so there's around 25 to 50 times bigger than the idea for Bitcoin, right? So when you're talking about internet capital markets, it's huge. It is the holy grail, right? And that's why so many. I don't necessarily think that everybody that launches a DEX thinks about it in terms of that scale, right? But there certainly are some teams that do, and there's so many people that continue to go after it because it is just such a massive idea, just in terms of size. And one of the things which I think is also worth like adding to that is that's based on the size of capital markets today. And there's a article that I read. I actually can't remember who it was. It was an article I read a few years ago that talked about how whenever we've removed friction via the internet, we haven't just like taken out that tiny piece of friction and done things better. We've actually completely transformed the way in which kind of like commerce works around the world. And the two really good examples of that is email, right? Like email didn't make it faster for me to send a letter to you, right? It actually completely transformed the way in which businesses can operate, right? And spawned new business models and just kind of different ways of doing commerce across the world. Same is true for internet payments, right? It didn't just suddenly make it cheaper to send a payment online. It actually created an entire new category of businesses, right? They're just purely e-commerce businesses. So when we're talking about uh, kind of delivering on internet capital markets, right? It's not just a $270 trillion idea based on today. It's actually, you're talking about completely reshaping the way that capital formation works across the world, like forever. And for me, I kind of, some people might think I'm going too far, but like for me, I actually view that as one of the five most important things that humans could work on, right? Like you've got AGI, you've got multiplanetary species, you've probably got something on longevity, something on climate change, and then I think you've got like internet capital markets, because every single thing that we do as like humans in some way comes down to capital formation, right? Like, and if you can transform the way that that works around the world, you can actually just accelerate GDP growth for everybody forever,
It's
right?
kind of like the value leakage of the current system and the extraction of current financial markets. What you can do is you can basically leak that back to people, businesses everywhere, which just levels up the earnings, the revenues of everyone.
Yeah, and
Basically,
make
it
it more
trickles down.
open, accessible. Like, just make it so somebody in India who's, just as an example, right, come up with a new business, or has got an existing business, is wanting to access capital in some way, right? Like, how do they actually go and access that capital? Well, they don't have access to the NASDAQ, right? Like, so today they're kind of constrained in how quickly they could grow that business. Well, if you open capital markets up to everybody and make and reshape the way that capital formation works, so it's open, accessible to everybody, right? Like, then you are just transforming it. And it's quite like detached, and like clearly it's like a long way away, right? Like, but the long-term aim of the product is that, right? Like, and that's this, for me, that's why it's such a big idea. You got to bring that back into like, okay, well, like, what is it
So
today?
yeah,
It's a
what is the
DEX,
first
right? Like,
step? What
yeah,
is the first step to get there,
it's a,
right?
you know, it's a DEX, right? Like, there's no point painting out to be more than that today, but it is a stepping stone to delivering that long-term vision.
Yeah. I think yeah, bringing it back to today, of course and to reality, right? So we are still, I think, sort of like confined in sort of the DeFi
Yeah.
bubble, which is growing with real world assets, which is growing with traditional financial players now entering as well. So I think we are uh, at the cusp really of like the early innovators to now the sort of like early adopters coming in. Um, And yeah, but we are of course still in this like DeFi bubble. But so this vision is clear, but how do you sort of start? How do you execute on this?
Yeah.
Like what is, and this is I think where Reya is today, right? Like what is it that you are building right now?
Yeah, so we're trying to marry from an engineering perspective. There's two sides. There's actually product, and then there's how do you actually grow the whole thing? What's the distribution? And on the engineering side, there's these two competing requirements of how do you make it fast? And talking like sub 10 millisecond execution of transactions, right? Like an actual transaction being a trade, right? Like not just sending ETH to one person to the next, right? And then alongside that, how do you make it decentralized, right? Which clearly those two things just are conflicting.
Mhm.
And we knew that we were not going to be able to solve that immediately. So what we actually did as the first step is we launched what we considered to really be a proof of concept, where it was a forked version of Arbitrum Orbit, which obviously you guys helped us with, right? We customized it to make it faster, increase like throughput, etc. And we put a DEX on top. And off the back of doing that, we obviously got volume going, built the community, etc. But also generated the learnings to figure out like how do we actually get to that holy grail of fast but decentralized. And that's what we've now got to, right? So we have now actually figured out an architecture that is not kind of like foregoing one of those requirements. And if you look at a lot of the dexes that are out there today, they have had to like forego one of those, right? So you've got a lot of dexes which might have an order book as an example that's actually centralized, it's not on chain, right? And that is fine because it allows them to be fast. So they've taken fast instead of decentralized. And then you've got others, and probably the best example of this is HyperLiquid, where they've actually said, no, we're going to stick it all on chain. So we're going to commit to being decentralized. You could debate whether HyperLiquid is decentralized, but they're committed to that. But in doing so, they've actually got 200 millisecond execution times, right? Which they paint as a positive because they favor cancellations and LPs and all this type of stuff. But still, long term, can you displace NASDAQ if you've got 200 millisecond execution? Probably not, right? Like, because you need to be able to compete with the speed that they have. So,
But maybe just taking a step back. So what you are building, what is Reya today? It's trying to build the most performant decentralized exchange. I think in particularly right now focused on perpetuals trading, so leverage trading, correct? Similar to like how HyperLiquid of course started, and HyperLiquid is of course one of the most successful projects in this space right now from like a revenue generation point of view, from a product market point of view. And we know that when it comes to yield being generated, perpetual protocols, perp dexes are the killer product right now that is being able to generate hundreds of millions of dollars of yield every year. Ethena, etc., is completely based on that primitive with a basis trade. So the idea for now, how you want to start is really, okay, there are decentralized exchanges, there are decentralized perpetual protocols. In this sort of crypto ecosystem we are in, you want to challenge these incumbents, and you think you have a superior architecture and approach of how you can actually make it faster, more decentralized, without basically trading off as much on either of the sides as some of the existing solutions do, correct?
exactly. So it's faster than HyperLiquid. It's arguably more decentralized than HyperLiquid, right? Like, and it's the architecture that enables that. There's a question: is that what the user cares about on the other side, right? Like, there's definitely a hierarchy of needs there, right? So, is it secure? Is it reliable? Does it have got liquidity? Has it got the right markets, right? Has it got a diverse set of users, right? They're actually things that people probably care about like more, but the infrastructure enables you to do that, right? But fundamentally, yes, like what we have as an architecture, it is what we have now got to and what we're going to be launching. It is both faster and more decentralized than Hyperliquid, than Solana, who have their own decentralized NASDAQ narrative, right? Like everybody that's come before is better than that.
Yeah. And I think it's what is interesting. Let's go into a bit more detail of like, okay, how you guys actually think about the architecture. And I would assume there's probably like a progression of where you want to sort of like go in the future, how you start, similar to other ecosystems, and maybe just like comparing it for the audience to some of the today's so today ways that projects today are approaching us. I think the YDX and so forth was an early example that actually now I think transitioned to their own L1, right, on the Cosmos SDK. I think they're running into challenges when it comes to like speed and latency. I think a lot of when I talk to traders, a lot of people actually like I think left the exchange and looked for like faster alternatives. I think on this sort of in this this opportunity, I think HyperLiquid saw and had the right timing on launching, right? And I think they made the trade-off. Okay, we have a very sort of small validator set, hand-picked, right? Where we can have a pretty fast consensus, non EVM, but like really focused on like, okay, what is the optimal execution client to actually run a perpetual exchange? The EVM, which most I think blockchains run today, are not really like optimized for it, right? I think there are a bunch of reasons for it. Maybe we can go into some details here. But yeah, so these are I think the current sort of approaches how people have been trying it. And so yeah, how you guys like what are you guys building here? How are you guys different? And so what key unlocks do you see?
Yeah. So the biggest starting point, or the biggest source of differentiation as a starting point for us, is that we decoupled execution and consensus into different node types, right? And the beginning of like the solution that we got to was, okay, if we can stick these things into different node types, that should give us a super fast, super low latency execution environment whilst maintaining the benefits of like decentralized consensus. As we went down that path, we started to realize, actually, does this thing just evolve into a based rollup, right? And where we had historically talked internally about execution nodes and consensus nodes, actually what we now have is we have a gateway, which we describe as an execution node, and that leverages the consensus of Ethereum. And what's powerful about that is um, just kind of to do with the way in which based rollups work, which I'm sure we can get into. The gateway is able to essentially provide a pre-conf to a trader that it is going to include a transaction in the L1 block, right? So as a trader, you are able to get like confirmation very, very quickly that your trade has gone through. And critically for us, this is not just a pre-conf without actually running the transaction, because you need to be able to check, does this user have enough margin to be able to execute a trade? Like what's the price that they're going to get once this is actually like kind of like processed, right? And you have to give confirmation back to the user of those pieces, right? So we have a very, very, very high hardware requirement execution node, also known as a gateway, right? That gives these fast pre-confs, but can then like ensure that it is able to include those transactions in the L1 block, right? At which point it propagates through Ethereum consensus. So you essentially have at that point like sub 10 millisecond execution time with the decentralization of Ethereum, right? Which makes it both fast but decentralized. And I mean, we can get into all of the details around that, but that was there's the key unlock, and everything is basically built off that.
I think that's sort of like where a lot of sort of industry research leaders such as Justin Drake, who was always also on the pod a couple of weeks ago with my co-founder Louis, I think sees the sort of end state of building decentralized systems, right? First of all, decoupling data availability from execution. I think this is the whole rollup centric roadmap thesis. You can host all of the data to Ethereum or a network like Celestia, and then execution actually happens locally on nodes, and there you can have extremely high throughput. But the problem, of course, and we've been working together, of course, for quite some time on your Arbitrum Orbit chain, and there, of course, right now there was still a centralized sequencer model, which arguably can be seen as like a centralization vector, of course, and you forego some of these benefits. But this is exactly what base sequencing tries to resolve, right? Base sequencing tries to resolve that the L1 sequencers, the L1 validators, they can actually sequence the blocks. Or I think in like a sort of like more near future, what is actually happening is that with proposal builder separation, block builders can come in, right? And block builders can run a certain architecture that like a client like yours, right? That you define, and they can do the sequencing. Validators can delegate their stake to these nodes, right? And then you still get the sort of attestation from the L1 validator that it will be included in the block. And if you have sort of real-time proving involved with all of that, then you actually have like a full sort of base sequence, and we can go into like the benefits of that. But is that sort of roughly how you guys are thinking about that?
Yeah, exactly. And there's just so to keep building on that, there's so if you think about proposer builder separation, right? Like it's kind of the architecture that we have is basically derived from that. And in terms of how that works, so we will have these what we're describing as execution nodes, like in kind of in Ethereum language, is described as a gateway, and a validator is essentially delegating to those execution nodes, like kind of essentially the idea that the L2 block will be built and created by them, right? Which is at that point it starts to look very similar to builder proposer separation. And what's different versus something like Arbitrum, which has a centralized sequencer, is you can have multiple people running execution nodes, right? So it's not going to be loads, like I'm talking like thousands, but you might have like 3 or 4 execution nodes that might exist to begin with. And critically, because the validators on Ethereum are deciding whether to delegate or not, right? They could theoretically revoke their delegation. So actually, the people who are in control of like, is this thing existing and are these people being trusted to do execution is actually the Ethereum node operators. So it's from because of that, you are in the same way that with build or proposer separation, the reality is there's only like two main people doing building, right? But you could still end up with a very small number of people who are actually running these execution nodes. But because Ethereum has node validators actually have the ability to revoke that delegation, you are maintaining the decentralization benefits of Ethereum, right? So it's all built on that same concept, basically.
Yeah. And so based rollups compared to traditional rollups that we already have seen sort of emerge over the last couple of years, of course, primary benefit being that you decentralize the sequencer, right? So you're not reliant on a single central part anymore. Of course, if you go like decentralized, you sort of risk introducing some latency, right? And there, I think the question will be, okay, how many nodes are actually like giving you the pre-confirmation, right? And I think they are you just mentioned there will be like this initial set and so forth, right? And then of course, who is then actually providing you with the finality of the consensus around the order list of transactions, which in this case then will be Ethereum, right, and Ethereum validators. And I think a big unlock, I think that Vitalik and Justin Drake always sort of like talks about is of course also like synchronous composability, which is these are like end state goal. And I think this is of course, as we know, it will still take some time to get there. Proving costs and so forth, proving latency have to come down significantly in order to actually achieve this, because at the end of the day, the whole sort of roll up block has to be in real time proven on Ethereum and then sort of verified. And this will still take time. I think real time proving exists right now for like Ethereum block times, but if you go to like gigagas, which I think we are talking about here, right? More than gigagas probably, then you will need better ZKVMs and GPU clusters and so forth doing this. But I think this is also where it becomes interesting, right? In this future state, like you can actually potentially synchronously compose with like Ethereum L1, right, where all the liquidity is. Like, talk to me about that. Do you see that as a big opportunity here? Or?
I think long term, yeah. There's a few steps to get through before we get there, and these things aren't. Well, I mean, as far as I'm aware, we are the first, or going to be the first, application-specific based rollup, right? To my knowledge, right? There's 100% people who are directionally heading towards based rollups today, but to be an application-specific based rollup, I'm not aware of anyone else doing that. So we're very much at like the edge of like kind of the research kind of frontier, really. And there's stuff which clearly is not solved yet, right? Like how do you actually have atomic composability with ER1, right? So long term, that's exciting in terms of what it enables, clearly, right? And even just because we were talking about Avi a minute ago, right? Like even just being able to do a flash loan from Avi onto like a trade on Reya, right? I can and execute some sort of arbitrage just instantly with limited capital, right? Like that's part of the holy grail of the composability of DeFi. But yeah, it's going to be a bit, that bit's going to be a bit further out.
Yeah. And also, just like in this world, the exciting thing is actually other applications composing with Reya, right? So,
Exactly.
so it's like, hey, just like from a like for example, from an Arrakis point of view, we're building LP strategies for like, let's say, ETHCC spot trading liquidity, and having a perp dex available that you can synchronously compose with to hedge your risk in your inventory is like a game changer, right? This is still not available on Ethereum, and there's so much demand for this. And you need to always have centralized actors doing this off chain on like a secondary leg. And so I think this is huge. But so I think so basically you're building towards the future of base rollups,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of like the end state of how a lot of people and researchers in this industry see applications sort of like being developed towards and sort of looking like. Tell me a bit more about this application specific part of Reya. Of course, most of the chains that are launching right now are like vanilla EVM,
Yeah.
in vanilla EVM rollups with fraud proofs or like so CK proofs. Yeah, how do you think about this for Reya? Yeah, what are you guys sort of like looking into here?
Yeah, so there's rare chain as a entire piece, which really is the execution node, but actually also the way in which it interacts with L1 validators. But if you just think about those execution nodes, they actually will be running two chains effectively. So there's going to be native Rust components, which is going to be everything that requires super low latency. So everything to do with the order book, liquidations, etc., etc. That's all going to be going through like essentially a Rust VM, right? And separate to that, we have the existing product, which is built on Arbitrum Orbit, right? A lot of the logic is going to come out of what is today in smart contracts, move into the Rust VM. And alongside the Rust VM, we'll have Arbitrum Orbit still running. So there'll be within Rare Chain, there'll be essentially an EVM and a Rust VM, right? Which is containing the native components. And those two things, there's a bunch of stuff we want to try figure out in terms of how, like, with precompiles, they can talk to each other. But it's essentially this Rust component, which is going to be the like piece which is super fast, right? And operates in a manner that is based, right? The actual optimistic side of like Arbitrum Orbit will continue to operate the way that Arbitrum Orbit works today. Right? We just need these things to talk to each other. And then the way that we see it evolving is just going back to the number of different execution nodes. Like to begin with, there's going to be one, just being realistic, right? But that piece actually is going to be something which we will make permissionless. So anybody can come in, they can spin up one of these execution nodes. It requires the validators to delegate responsibility to those people, right? So again, it's Ethereum L1 validators that have control over it. But what we can also set is we can set a structure where um, the execution node actually rotates according to every certain number of slots, right? Like, and what that means is it means that every 12 seconds, like when each validator node is changing on Ethereum, you're not getting a new execution node and just adding a load of latencies. These two things have to synchronize with each other. You can actually like push that out to hours, if not longer, right? And have these essentially sticky execution environments that market makers and other traders can talk to for a prolonged period of time, and they get warning that it's about to migrate to the next execution node, right? And that allows you to have essentially a rotating execution environment, but it's not rotating every 12 seconds and creating latency and other issues.
So it's kind of like Binance being so like moving across the globe every now and then, just that it's not CZ being able to like say, okay, we'll just like switch it up and you can't access it. It's just like permissionlessly accessible, rotating around. And if one fails, then there's always the fail back fall over that can pick up and start running it. And
Exactly. Yeah. And if one fails, not only is there fallback, but they get slashed, and right, there's economic incentives for maintaining it.
yeah, and you need that because you need to allow parties to interact with it as so like co-located as possible in order to really benefit from providing the best possible market making
Yeah.
capabilities and the tightest spreads. And Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're not going to achieve sub 10 milliseconds like execution time unless they're able to co-locate anyway. So they actually have to they themselves, and there's people that won't care about this, and you can actually build like a node which acts as a router, so it just always kind of routes it to the execution node. But there's a proportion of the market that does really care about speed,
Yeah.
right? And if you want those people to be interacting on the exchange, then they need to know like which execution node is live, and they also need to be able to migrate in advance of the next execution node to go live.
Yeah, and so tying it back to like what makes a perp successful, and of course there are like some business related things we can maybe talk about them at the end, right?
Yeah.
Like, but from a technological point of view, I think a lot of market makers care about, right, is like as you said, speed, latency, right, and then decentralization. And so basically, if we look at the like let's say incumbent, right, or like the shiny project everyone is talking about, HyperLiquid right now. At the end of the day, what they're doing right now is they have so like a set number of nodes. They're like their own L1,
Yeah.
and so they combine execution and consensus among these nodes, right? And consensus, of course, always adds like this overhead to anything, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to talk to each other, and the smaller the group, the faster it gets. And so they can only go as sort of like decentralized as this sort of like allows. And what you're saying is, okay, instead of that, we actually have these sort of like gateway nodes that are giving you the pre-confirmation like by themselves, and then the consensus on the data is then later outsourced to like a Ethereum or whatever other layer you guys choose. And this way you basically try to create a trade-off where you get the best of both worlds, the lower latency, fast executions, better pricing, but then also sort of higher security and better guarantees and decentralization
Yeah,
at the end of the day. Right?
exactly. So it's basically faster and more decentralized. Right now, then there's a question of, well, there's a point in time where people care about that. The question is, on day one, do people care about that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I think it's probably fair to say that they don't. Right? Just being honest. Right? That doesn't mean that that should not be the direction, like for the business.
Yeah.
But on day one, there's like more fundamental needs which people care about. Like, is it secure? Is it reliable? Is it consistently performant? Right? Like, does it have deep liquidity? Right? Does it have the right markets? Has it got a variety of different user groups so people can trade against each other? Right? Like, so those things obviously matter, like more to begin with, but you have to have that north star of what it is we're trying to get to.
And I think this is also like in this market where there are a variety of different like flavors of perp dexes coming out, and this price being so big that people try different implementation. I think you need to be credibly differentiated from a technology point of view in order to like really be able to have a meaningful say in like capturing this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you're transitioning to something else, of course you are like Reya, the ecosystem is evolving, and I heard that there's also a token coming up. I'm not sure how much you are sort of comfortable like sharing here, right? But yeah, like what can you share about this? How will this potentially interplay here? Have you already like thought about that, or what can you share?
Yeah, we have thought about it, like just a lot, right? And we've got the whole thing designed, frankly. Um, I don't know if I'm happy to share all of it right now.
No worries.
I mean, there's some stuff which I've already said, right? So anybody running an execution node is obviously going to have to stake rare, right? And um, that essentially secures the pre-comps, right? Effectively, and if they misbehave, they get slashed, right? So there's a clear economic incentive for um, people operating those nodes to operate in the right way. The other parts of the tokenomics design, yeah, I'm just gonna not talk about right now.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And now we'll probably hear more about this. Maybe shifting gears a bit to the business aspect. Of course, you need to have a credible technological differentiation and advantage over competitive products that are trying to like win this big prize as well. And we know like latency, decentralization, and so forth, listing of assets. These are all,
Yeah.
I think, musts in order to really like be able to challenge them. Um, but maybe from like a so like what do you think from a go-to-market perspective, right? As a founder, having been through a bunch of startups and most recently also DeFi protocols. Like, how would you sort of go about this, or how do you what do you think is like the most critical factors to focus on?
Well, I think the main thing is giving people something they can't get anywhere else, right? Like if you can just do that, then and as long as that thing has value, then automatically you're going to get a flow of people coming through to your product. So we spend a lot of time kind of kind of working out or talking to users and understanding users' needs, right? Like and addressing those needs in different ways. And those foundational pieces you still have to like deliver on secure, reliable, performant, etc. But one of the big things that we announced last month was around how we're unifying like TradFi and DeFi into a single on-chain hub, right? So we're talking about people being able to use RWAs as margin, right? And we're talking about people being able to trade RWA perps, right? And being able to access those types of products on chain. And for a lot of people, they don't have access to either of those today, right? They can't access it in traditional finance. And sometimes some of those products don't even exist in traditional finance, right? You don't have RWA perps in traditional finance today. So actually creating those products and doing that really well and giving people access to that, we see as like one of the core
Are you
wedges.
talking about RWAs as collateral,
Both.
or then as the actual market to like
Yeah,
leverage it?
both, right? So people being able to, so a simple end, right? So someone being able to hold US treasuries as a form of margin,
Mhm.
right? Just like a simple end. There's lots of RWAs that are either already being tokenized or about to be tokenized.
Yeah.
We're not actually looking to be the tokenization issuer.
Yeah.
Like there's just a different business model. But we've got a few people who we're talking to at the moment that can be potential partners for that. And from our perspective, we've actually built all the infrastructure so that people can hold RWAs as margin, right? So the infrastructure already exists. It's about now bringing in the assets. And that's one side. And then on the other side, it's actually markets, right? So how many people want to trade Robinhood perp? Probably quite a lot of people. How many people want to trade coin or circle,
Mhm.
right? Like circle, ironically, is a just crazy market cap because there's a scarcity of crypto businesses that have like kind of equity based crypto businesses, right? But how many degens are there that want to trade that? There's probably quite a lot. So actually enabling those types of markets to exist on chain, we see as a core part of this like unification strategy.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is like where all the like this is what all the big companies in the world are thinking about, right? We
Yeah,
saw the Robinhood announcement. Robinhood is thinking about perps. I bet like the Revoluts, the everyone's, they are like realizing that this is a crypto native way how you can build financial products and get people to speculate on assets and invest in assets that just doesn't exist really in traditional finance. And I think this is what really everyone wants. And maybe so like to wrap it up here, going back to the sort of go-to-market question, of course, you need the superior product, right? You need you need to have the interesting markets. You need to have key innovations, such as okay, you can actually have yield-bearing collateral margin accounts that actually earn your money while you trade. Right? These are things that are all innovations that can really make a difference. But what is your strategy around like acquiring that initial liquidity to like seed,
yeah,
let's say, the markets, right? And then of course also get the order flow, which I assume if you actually have a lot of liquidity and you actually have really good pricing and the best execution, then of course market makers will come in and they will see it,
yeah.
right? But yeah, so how do you think about that?
So that's where we launched the like proof of concept, right? Like, that's part of the reason why we launched the proof of concept because it enabled us to build liquidity quite quickly, which we did like around a year ago. We actually haven't really focused on it since because there's so much liquidity that came in, and it also enabled us to start building traction with traders, right? So I don't think that there is necessarily like one silver bullet. These things you kind of like grow them over time. Um, and the things that are going to enable us to keep growing it over time is obviously having markets and stuff that people want but can't get access to anywhere else. But then also just to go back to the infrastructure piece, there's a very 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 credible reason and vision for the future around how this becomes like huge, like Bitcoin level big, right? Like, and obviously that will take many years and there's going to be lots of competition along the way. But we believe we've actually got a very credible reason as to why that could become the case in the future. Right? Like, it's just on us to deliver on it and as a community to help bring that to life as well.
Yeah. So basically we are talking about attacking one of the biggest prices potentially in crypto with a very unique sort of futuristic architecture, um, going targeting the future of how like the Ethereum Foundation sort of tries to design its systems of like, okay, roll-up technology, separation of execution and data, and consensus, and then synchronous composability with the L1, getting the security of the L1 validator set, which is sort of like basically the end state of how many people think the industry will look towards. I think it's a clear differentiation between all the existing solutions out there. I think it makes a ton of sense. Of course, there will be things to figure out along the way, right?
Yeah.
I think the industry is moving, research is evolving. I think this is where also we help, right? We have a lot of expertise in that area. We are partnering with you guys to try to figure out, okay, how do you actually build these things? Who are the parties to partner with? But I think there's already consensus around like this is the way it should be designed. So I'm extremely excited to work together with you guys on like how can this be achieved. What are the interesting little technical problems to be solved? I bet there will be many, and there are already a lot of them, right? But yeah, so any sort of final thoughts you want to share? What should people be sort of watching out for in the next couple of weeks? I heard there are a couple of things being announced.
Yeah. Well, so hopefully this goes out after we've announced Road Chain, but there's a no, we're going to be announcing everything that we talked about today.
Nice.
And there's obviously going to be an exciting period. And then after that, we're actually going to announce tokenomics as well. So there's going to be like 2 announcements to go out. And then maybe like final thoughts on so we talk about building a decentralized NASDAQ. I obviously know that that's the Solana like slogan.
Mhm.
Um, this type of product I actually don't think is possible on anything other than Ethereum. Right? Like Ethereum's been getting destroyed over the past few years from a price in particular, but Ethereum has committed to a modular architecture. Right? It's by far the most advanced ecosystem in terms of modular architecture. Like we couldn't actually build this product anywhere else. Right? Like, and to have something which is like credibly as fast as traditional finance, but as decentralized as Ethereum, actually means that we can genuinely deliver a decentralized NASDAQ.
And if the future of the based roll-up sort of narrative and architecture plays out as it is designed, then like Robinhood just announced their rollup on Ethereum. Like we help Kraken run their rollup on Ethereum. Coinbase has their rollup on Ethereum. Our assumption is a lot of them will become based
Yeah.
as well, and there will be a composability that you will have with these that
Massive products. Yeah.
with these massive distribution players, right? That is very hard to replicate if you are like your own ecosystem somewhere completely separate. So I think if this all plays out, this is a huge opportunity. Super excited for you guys to continue push the boundaries of like what is possible in this space. And yeah, can't wait to hear more about the news you will share soon. Yeah, where can people find you on social media and so forth?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at 0x Simon Jones, if I remember my own handle. And you can follow Reya. So Reya is REYA underscore XYZ is the Twitter handle. So yeah, give us a follow, jump in the Discord. There's teams in Discord all the time. If you've got any questions, happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Simon, for coming. Always a pleasure to chat.
Yeah. Thank you for
And
having
yeah,
me.
of course, and hope you enjoy the rest of Cannes and ECC.
You too.